Hi, my name is Scott Rosenfeld, and I am so happy to be here today to talk about how to change a light bulb. This is a basic class on LED lighting for museums. And this is good for whether you're retrofitting your existing museum to new lighting or if you're building a new museum. First, I'm going to start with something beautiful. This is my favorite exhibit that I've ever worked on, Linotiglia Petra at the Renwick Art Gallery. And I wanted to start with this because it shows the importance of lighting, because when you put light on objects, the very energy of light is what allows us to see. It hits these objects and reflect. And it's especially important with glass. And one of our finest glass artists in history is Linotiglia Petra, born in the 1930s in Italy. By the time he was 12, he started working in the glass factories, a master at age 25. He then took the secrets of Venetian glass and brought them to the West, teaching at Pilchuck, working with Chihuly. In the 21st century, he finally had a retrospective where he started to show his own designs, and that's what we're doing here at the Renwick. What you're seeing here is the exhibit under incandescent work light, and I'm going to start to bring up the exhibit light, which is also incandescent, but the point here is it doesn't matter. If you know how to manipulate light, you know how to manipulate light, whether it's incandescent or LED. Let me show you. Quite a difference good exhibit lighting can make. And that's our point here, that your lighting choices, no matter what they are, no matter what technology you're using, should be there to support the artwork. Our artists and our culture and everything that we do in museums, we do so our visitors can understand, enjoy, and experience these things. And we want to do everything we can do with light to help tell these stories. And this is the story of all lighting sources. So I wanted to see in just one place, what are all the commonly used lighting sources? Of course, sunlight. I'm not going to tell any museum not to use sunlight, despite it being difficult to turn off, so we can't stop damage on light-sensitive materials. It's also difficult to control, but sunlight is fabulous. It's bright, allows views outside. There's a lot of things that I appreciate about sunlight and daylight. Incandescent light is what we've been using for museums until very recently, and I'd say of all the commercial museums are one of the last big commercial buildings to still be using incandescents. And it's because it took so long and these other technologies just weren't up to the task until we got to LED. Incandescent, the color was good enough, a little bit deficient in blue, but good enough. But most of all, these little point sources of incandescent light allowed us to control light and put light where we wanted it and leave the areas dark that we wanted to stay dark. So that's incandescent lighting. Fluorescent lighting had its uses. It's energy efficient, which is great, but the lighting source is often large and difficult to control, the very thing that I love most about incandescent. Also, the color isn't great, and color consistency isn't great. So that takes out in fluorescent. HID you often see in your big box retail stores. You'll see it on street lighting, and it is mercury rich. You have to filter mercury out. It also isn't particularly color stable. LEDs are so much better. And that's how we ended up with LEDs. As much as LEDs being fantastic, which they really can be, they are so much better than the legacy sources. This is an old test bench of mine when I was trying to figure out what kind of light bulbs to use. And that's emblematic of what we're trying to do here today. There's lots of choices, and I want to help you today pare down. And when you're looking at a massive quantity of what light bulbs do I choose for my tasks, by the end of this session, you should have a better idea of what you're going for, and that'll help you select your light bulbs. It'll still be a difficult choice, but you'll have a lot more knowledge and techniques at your disposal to help you make those decisions. This list of 5 properties is everything I know about light. I often like organizing my talks with this, even though each talk is different. I could teach a college class on each one of these 5 properties. And let's kick them off one at a time. Quantity. How much light is there? Pretty simple, and we're going to go into each metrics that describe and techniques to describe how do you decide how much light and how do you pick a right lighting source with the right quantity aspects. Distribution, is it a spotlight? Is it a floodlight? And then how do you take these combinations of light and paint your environment, paint your gallery with them? The spectrum of light. What is the color of light? And how does the spectrum that created that color impact the appearance of objects? Movement. Does the light move? Whether it's a candle flicker or a moving light. And do people move? Because movement is one of the most powerful properties and design properties that we can use. We're biologically predisposed to see movement. Snakes in the grass. When something moves, is it going to eat us or can we eat it? And especially when it comes to things like color, we're especially tuned to movement, even from looking at a slide from one slide to the next. And angle of light, the first four properties that I mentioned, the first four qualities, they're about the lighting source themselves. Angle is about what do you do with that lighting source? Where do you put it? And that has a massive effect on our appearance and our perception of our galleries. But it's not going to be what we're talking about today, because we're really trying to help people make decisions about lighting sources, specifically LEDs, and how to choose the right LED. And let's kick it off with quantity. This is a little bit simpler for museums because we've got very firm standards. If it's a light-sensitive material, we use the smallest quantities of light we need in order to see well. As a group, we've decided that's basically 50 to 75 lux. If it's a little bit more durable, things like oil paintings that are more durable but still light sensitive, we'll use a more optimal quantity of light of 150 to 350 lux, depending on what your conservator and the owner of the artwork tells you. Now, my talk today, I keep on saying artwork. Today's talk is really made for all museums, no matter what you're doing. I've spent my career working art museums, so art is really my de facto. So things that aren't light sensitive, this would include rocks, metals, anything that has seen flame or a kiln cannot be damaged by light, and they're not light sensitive, and there's no reason to put a limit on it. And here's the conversion factor from lux to foot candles at the bottom. Basically 10 lux equals 1 foot candle. That's a little bit more than that. So 75 lux would equal 7 foot candles. I want to get into some basic metrics, because if you're looking at a catalog and you're trying to pick a light bulb or pick a lighting source, these metrics will be used often, so you should have some background about what they are. The lumen, let's say we start with a light bulb. That light bulb is basically going to throw light in all directions. The lumen is the potential quality of light to be able, the quality of potential light to spread in all directions from a source, whether it's a light bulb, an LED, or whatever it is. It's the potential of the system to create light. This is quite different from illuminance. Let's say we introduce an object, a brick wall. How much of this potential light hits a square area of that surface? That's a foot candle or a meter. What the lumen itself is actually a psychophysical unit. It's watts integrated with a standard observer. Illuminance is how much of this psychophysical energy hits an object. That's all it tells us. It doesn't tell us how bright the object is. That depends on a lot of the aspects of the object itself. It just tells us how much of this potential psychophysical unit called the lumen hits a square meter or a square foot of surface. Luminance actually may be more useful to let us know a little bit more about brightness, because that's a lumen per solid angle, which is a steradian. So it tells us, say, how much light is heading in the direction of your eye, perhaps bouncing off that brick wall, or if you stare up at the light bulb, how glary is that light bulb? The metric for luminance is candela. Very useful if you're trying to figure out how bright something is. And it's also useful if you're trying to pick a lighting source, and possibly more useful than lumens. So let's say we take a 1500 lumen source and we put that into a 40-degree spotlight, say, for instance, 3000 candelas. If I take that same 1500 lumen source and I pack it into a smaller, tighter spotlight at 25 degrees, I have more than twice as many candela. And if I come down to 15 degrees, it gets significantly brighter still. So the more I pack all those lumens into a tighter area, the greater the candela values. So what's great about candela is this is what you're going to use if you want to compare two lighting sources of the same beam spread. In this case, 40, 25, or 15 degrees. So let's take a look as an example here. So first of all, I've got an incandescent up top and an LED on the bottom. And I'm going to highlight that they're both roughly the same beam spread. The incandescent is at 8 degrees for this AR111. And this lamp at 9 degrees is roughly a little bit brighter because it's 24,000 candela compared to 23,000 candela for the incandescent. So the LED in this circumstance is just a little bit brighter. Now CBCP, as you see here, stands for, the metric is candela. It stands for center beam candle power. Candle power being the candela, which we just talked about. What else do we have here? This is a 50 watt incandescent compared to an 18.5 watt LED. Watts do not necessarily equal lumens. If you Google on the internet, and this one was provided by CNET, it does a fairly good job, say for an A lamp, that if you want to say this number of my, if I used to use a 100 watt light bulb, I want about a 1600 lumen lamp. For a ballpark, that's okay, and it kind of gives you a wattage equivalent on LED. This gives you ballparks, but it is not nearly as precise as the candela method we were just discussing. It also is interesting to talk about efficacy, because one of the great things that I got to do when I was converting to LEDs, it was a unique time in my career where I got to actually do something for the environment. And instead of just using energy, saving energy. And efficacy is how we measure the rate that we're saving energy. And we finally get to reduce pollution a little bit, reduce carbon load a little bit, and do a little bit of good for the environment, at least harm it at a slower rate. So of this lamp here, we're looking at the LED. It's 1,000 lumens at 18.5 watts. That's lumens per watt. 54 lumens per watt. That's a 64% energy savings over your incandescent. That sounds pretty good, but on the scale of things, it's not that efficient in LED. I may still use it if it does the job and I can't get anything else to, but I really try to reduce energy consumption by 70 or 80% if I can. Where are we in the industry? Today's very best LEDs are 125 to 160 lumens per watt. And I'll be honest, I got this off of a Department of Energy website. I haven't looked at display lighting technology to see if we're meeting these targets with display lamps. Department of Energy's very best efficacy, their target efficacies, are at 200 lumens per watt with a theoretical limit of 255 lumens per watt. I put these up because they're aspirational, because we should be looking at these metrics. I'm not putting these up there because it may say, hey, we have to meet these targets. But that I am saying that when you're choosing a system, among your competing criteria of aesthetics and everything else, efficacy should be one of your competing criteria as you're choosing lighting sources, because we're here to save some energy after all. Distribution. This is, I believe, perhaps the most important and the least understood of everything we're talking about today, all these 5 controllable properties, or 4 that we'll discuss. Let's take a look at some lighting fixtures. So in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see a shower head LED. And what this is describing a retrofit LED. They just fit into these canisters, and it works pretty well. And these lights can look like a lot of things. Shower head or this, there's a whole variety. Now, when you put them into these sealed cans, results may vary. And if the light fixture manufacturer promises 25,000 hours, if you seal it up in a can, you're sealing up sensitive electronics, you may reduce lamp life. But at the same time, it works pretty well. If you've got an open back fixture, it'll work even better. The second type of lighting choice is an integral LED, where the LED, the entire fixture is made to accept an LED natively. The heat management is often better, the electronics often work a little bit better, and it's made to be an LED rather than retrofitting a different type of can. These cans can look like anything, like the one I just showed you with the sidecar, or they can look really exactly like our legacy fixtures, with perhaps some extra thermal stuff you don't see on the back. So just to repeat, you've got the retrofit LED, which if you're replacing your existing system, or if you really like a replaceable screw-in light bulb, you may choose to buy a new can or fixture that has a LED. Track lighting fixtures look like cans. What can I say? And then there's the integral LED, which is a fixture that's made to be an LED. And you can often replace either the LED or the associated electronics, because my experience is that those associated electronics, the capacitors and all those gears that make the LED work, are more likely to fail than the LED itself. Often the LED is one of the more robust elements in the system. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is one of the LED retrofit systems that I installed just a few years ago. This was a new system, and I didn't feel like integral LEDs were worth the money, because those fixtures are sometimes more expensive, and I was getting better quality out of the retrofits a few years ago. So we designed this system, and what we see is from the left to the right, and I'll show this image a few times. A framing projector on the left with different types of lensing. This is a projector where we can shutter the light. This is a wall washer, which is made to get an even wash across walls. This light has with a flat front, we often call an object light, and it has all kinds of uses, from floodlighting, wall washing, to spotlighting. And we've got a whole range of accessories, cross baffles to reduce glare, and a whole range of light bulbs to choose different beam spreads by choosing different lamps that we have here. MR16, same thing as this larger unit in a smaller package with different lenses. And this unit, this MR16 is larger because it's got integral electronics, where this fixture is much smaller because it's requiring electronics that are separate from the lighting fixture. An example of a lighting track and different lenses that can fit into this unit. This particular light bulb does not have fins on the front. You can actually block the front of the lamp without harming its thermal characteristics to keep it from cooling itself. Most LEDs, or practically all LEDs, most of the heat's going to come out of the back of the lamp. But some LEDs require flow through from the front of the fixture through the back of the fixture. So in this case, and in other cases, LED manufacturers are making fixtures made for retrofit lamps to allow more passive ventilation through the fixture from the front through the back. This fixture has specially made holes for that function. Similar picture, different lighting system. This is integral LEDs. Moving from the left to the right, this is more of a floodlight. This is a 19 millimeter lighting source. This particular one has 6 different LEDs inside of it to create a wide spectrum of light. So we can either have deep colors of light, or more likely variants of tints of light. And we'll talk a little bit more about color as we go on. This fixture either has cross baffles to become an object light, or a wall wash front to turn the same fixture into either a wall wash or an object light. We were really proud of that fixture. Lots of different types of louvers to reduce glare, and different optic choices so we can go from spot to flood. The tightest spot we can get at 19 millimeters is about 15 degrees, and I'll show you some images of that in a moment. This is a 4 degree with glare accessories and a whole bunch of lenses to spread the light for both of these lighting sources, actually. These two are basically doing the same thing as the larger units, except they're smaller. And a framing projector. I want to take a close-up look of the integral LED 19 millimeter light. And these are just 2 sample optics. What's interesting about these 2 optics is they're both 20 degrees, whether it's a lensed or aluminum reflector. And the way you install these optics, right now this is showing the 19 millimeter with the bare lighting source. I'm going to take this 19 millimeter, and on the back side of it, you can see it's keyed. You lock it into this LED, and you can see this LED can be replaced and removed. And I install the optic. This is the aluminum optic, and I'll show you the lensed optic. Let's take a look at these on a wall. So these are these 2 same lighting sources. On the left is the aluminum optic, and on the right is the lensed optic. And what you see on the aluminum optic is that it actually throws light everywhere. You may want this. It gives you a hot spot in the middle and then light thrown everywhere, where the lensed optic is a lot more controlled. It just throws light where you want it in this 20-degree beam. If we take a look at the foot candles, the center beam of both of them is about the same. That's interesting. But if you measure this in candelas, the candela value is much greater with the aluminum optic because it's measuring how much light comes into the entire system, not just the beam in the middle. They're both 2000 lumen LEDs. Very different. And this isn't about good and bad. This is about making choices that allow you to control light based on your application. We measure beams in two ways. You measure the hot spot in the middle, and the hot spot to 50% is the beam angle. And the field angle is 50% to 10%. On this aluminum optic, most of what you're getting is spill, which is the quantity of light beyond 10%. And that's honestly mostly going to be expressed as glare in the galleries. So not necessarily the most usable light that you're seeing out here. At the same time, it depends on what you're doing. If you're doing wall washing and you take one of these lighting sources, this is now a retrofit option here. It may work well for wall washing. And I'm going to just show you the shape of the wall washer, that it's open to the viewer, open to the wall and closed to the viewer. And in this case, we're using aluminum window screen to reduce the illuminance. I'm going to take this fixture and install it in a gallery, and it looks like this. So that aluminum reflector with through light everywhere, that might be a better optic if you want to light a wall flatly. Perhaps you don't want a 20-degree beam, maybe you want a 40-degree beam, but the same kind of idea. If you're using that aluminum, it's quite efficient, but it doesn't lens and control the beam quite as tightly. And this type of light does great. You get this nice even wall wash, and the light is very low glare. That's in opposition to the way it used to be in this gallery when we just put the lenses in front of the unit and it was super glary. And by using wall washers, it's so much better, and it occludes the lens and comes up with a low glare approach. This is the object light, the flat front. We've got lenses that can be used as accessories and a deep cross baffle. This is the type of unit that I also used for wall washing in this next example, where I've got two layers of light, wall wash and spotlights on the artwork. Let me turn off the spotlights, and that's just a basic wall wash. And this is a perfectly great lighting technique. Use it all the time, just an even wash of light, and a lot of museums do this. And I'd say if your museum doesn't have people that really want to spend the time and energy on lighting, this is a perfectly good way to light your museum, just an even wash of light. Now, what you'll often see in museums also are these scallops. What I did is I just took the lenses out of these units. These scallops are not necessarily helpful. People often have them because they don't know how to get rid of them, which you get rid of them by putting an asymmetric lens that spreads the light left and right. People can make a decent composition of them. Like I say, it doesn't say anything about the environment, the gallery, or the artwork. And I think those lensed options are better. And that's what it looks like. Super simple and really effective. It actually is simple in practice, but it does take a fair amount of skill to get a perfectly even wash with low glare fixtures. The more glare there is, actually the easier it is to get an even wash on your walls. There's a trade-off there. I'm going to add the spotlights back in, or actually see the spotlights alone. And you can see what I'm trying to do here is match the size of the spot to the size of the artwork. This also allows me to vary the intensity of the light if I'd like. So the darker artworks may need a little bit more light to look equally bright as the darker objects. If I'm doing a retrospective of one artist, I may not do that. I may want everything to be dead even so you can see exactly what the artists are doing. But these artists never imagined that they'd be shown all together. So I try to come up with a more even composition by varying the degree of spotlights, all staying within my conservation levels. I add the wall wash back in, and I've got a complete system. So distribution is so important, I want to keep on talking about it. And I want to show you an example from the Renwick Gallery. This is under Worklight. This is a Western quilts exhibit, and it is amazing. I love this exhibit. It includes quilts that were passed around the community from person to person, where they would sign messages, where they'd sew messages into the quilts. So they would and then gift them to members of the community with writing from across the community. I loved this exhibit. This was work lighting. I came in with my team. We spent about 40 hours hanging tons of lights, spending a lot of time and energy, and I think it's worth it because this is what we came up with. This is the same intensity as the previous slide. That was 50 lux. This is 50 lux as well. And by carefully putting the light where we want to and taking it away where we don't, you can see that the artwork looks so much brighter and more inviting. This is the range of beam spreads that I like to build into my lighting designs: 4, 8, 15, 25, and 40 degrees. And this shows you how we're measuring the beam spread. It goes from the lighting source as an angle out. The farther you get away from the light, the dimmer the light will be and the larger the light will be. That's just how light works. I am a real fan of this 4-degree lamp because it's the best at putting the light where you want it. Larger beam sources are going to just throw light everywhere. There's no reason for there to be spill on the floor here. And that's what happens here. So getting the artwork to be the brightest thing in the room, not the lighting source from glare and not the spill on the floor. It's also worth noting, this chapter figure and heading, this is from RP 3017, and this was, I'm the chair of the committee that formed this document. This is the American National Standard for Lighting Museums. The standard practice for museums comes from the Illuminating and Engineering Society. The text is called RP 3017, and this was a graphic that I helped develop for that text, and because I did it at Smithsonian, we're using it here. I also want to talk about, again, this 4-degree beam. In the retrofit system, it looks like this. It's got these 3 heads. The reason is that one LED wasn't bright enough, so we added 3. And this works great in a screw-in lamp. Some of you also have these old PAR 36 or AR111 12-volt or 5.5-volt fixtures. There were some really good 4-degree options for this fixture. My understanding is they're no longer available, which is really sad. There are some floodlights available and maybe some 8 degrees available to retrofit these old AR11 PAR 36 fixtures. And it's interesting. In the old days with incandescent, you may have used this fixture exclusively for spotlighting and the screw-in light bulbs exclusively for floodlighting. Now things may have switched, and you may find it easier to get a floodlight in the AR111 form factor and use your screw-in light bulbs for spotlights. That's an interesting retrofitting tip. On the integral side, we've got this fixture, again with 3 heads because one wasn't bright enough, so we added 3. Let me show you what it looks like close up. Instead of the 19 millimeter, we've got a tiny LED sitting behind these. That's only a millimeter or 2 big to create those narrow spots. And if I'm going to use lenses, which I'm going to show you in a second, you always have to use a cross baffle because as soon as this light hits a lens, it's going to start getting glary. So we reduce glare with a cross baffle. This is what a 19 millimeter looks like. That's about the tightest spot I can get at 19 millimeters. You can do a little bit tighter at 15, but it's not much. If you want to get a tighter spot out of a 19 millimeter, I'm told you need to get a reflector the size of a garbage can. So this is pretty much the tightest we're going to get. On the wall, you'll see a dollar bill right here for scale. And this is that 4-degree beam we're showing you. And this is the value of that 4-degree and how it's so much smaller than we're typically going to get from other lighting sources. And it's coming in that fixture I just showed you. You take that 4-degree and you add lenses. What's amazing about LEDs is that we used to be stuck with glass. Now we've got holographic clean room technology that can produce extraordinary lenses that allow us to manipulate light in ways we never dreamed possible. And this shows you some of these, that you can spread the light a little bit or really all the way around the room. This is a 1x15. I've got a 1x60 that I can light an entire cornice with a single light. It's really fun and exciting. Let me show you. I did an exhibit at the Renwick Gallery. It was the inaugural exhibit after a large renovation called Wonder. And this is artwork by Maya Lin. This artwork was installed. We had the opening dinner with the Supreme Court justices, Justice Roberts and Justice Ginsburg. And the next morning, Maya Lin comes to me and says, "What have you done to my art? I hate flat lighting." Now, we thought, the curator and the team thought flat lighting was the way to go because this is a contemporary artist and we're showing off the building. And what Maya Lin is doing here is she's creating rivers of glass that are mimicking the place of Washington, D.C. So this is the Delaware Bay here. And what the materials she's using are small glass marbles. This was exactly the raw material that Maya Lin's father used to use to blow glass. He actually sculpted in glass himself, and this was his raw material. So she used this as the raw material to create, in this case, the Chesapeake Bay and the Potomac River. And if this is a map, Washington, D.C. is located right here. And what's wonderful is if you were to look out this window about a half mile down the road, this is the Potomac, and you actually see the Potomac looking out this window. I love this artwork. And I was crestfallen when Maya Lin said, "We need to work on the lighting." And I was thrilled when I got to work with her for a few hours and take this new technique that we developed, this 4-degree, three LED light bulb we had developed for the Renwick. It hadn't existed previously. And we matched it with those lenses, and this is what we came up with. We added rivers of light on top of the rivers of glass. And she loved it. Our visitors thoroughly enjoyed it. And it allowed us to see this artwork in a way that the artist wanted to see it. Similar story happened with a contemporary gallery that we recently transitioned. The previous gallery I just saw you, the Maya Lin, that was a retrofit example. This is integral LEDs. We just finished this a few weeks ago. And we're talking about distribution, and that's what my curator complained about initially. I had already taken her notes by the time you're seeing this image here. When she initially saw it, she said, "I want it to be as bright as conservation limits will allow." And she didn't want to see any halos around the paintings. These paintings are made to hang on a white wall. If they're made to be spotlight, they're not made to have that spotlight to show that there's this distinction. We want to see the white walls crispy and evenly with no edge to that light. The edge has to be totally soft. So it's a perfect transition from the artwork to the wall. Distribution was the most important thing to my curator when she was giving me notes about what to do. And that takes us to spectrum. Spectrum is often what people talk about a lot, and there's a lot of emphasis on spectrum. And in my experience, there's too much weight placed on it, and our decisions can be made a little bit more quickly as people agonize about this stuff. Let's get into it. First of all, how do you create white light with LEDs? There's two basic methods, the phosphor converted method and multicolor LED. What does phosphor converted mean? That means that we start with LEDs that have a lot of energy in them, meaning that they're short wavelength, either blue LEDs, which are by far the most common. If you go to a big box store, I'm betting that every single LED in that store is going to be a blue phosphor converted LED. For museums, we also have violet phosphor LEDs, and that's because when a manufacturer uses violet LEDs and they market specifically to museums, and unfortunately they also make great LEDs and they're really high quality. It's unfortunate because violet is shorter wavelength than blue, and it's a little bit more damaging. So if blue LEDs are a little bit less damaging than incandescent, violet-based LEDs are about equal to incandescent as far as damage potential. There's also ultraviolet LEDs, which are much more damaging, and we do not recommend using them, and I cross them out. So ultraviolet can certainly create white light, but not recommended for museums. because you have to then filter the light, and whatever efficacy you're getting, you're dumping in your filter. Let's take a look at how these phosphor-converted lamps work, since it's such a bizarre idea. Phosphor, so that's what you get in this powder on the left-hand side. I've got a manufacturer that took phosphor and they integrated it into a silicone disc that would sit on top of a blue LED. I'll show you what that works like. So you see me here in blue. And you see me holding that silicone disc, and you see it's like kind of glowing unnaturally white. As I bring that silicone disc closer to the blue LED, it gets brighter and brighter. And what's happening is the blue LED is exciting the phosphor, down converting it to a lower energy state, which we see as bright white light. The quality of this light is high. This is an energy graph. On the y-axis is absolute irradiance, measured in microwatts per centimeter squared per nanometer. On the x-axis is nanometers. This is a graph of energy. This graph has limited value if you want to know how this energy will allow us to see. That is too complicated, integrating the world around us with our trichromatic vision and the energy. That takes some serious maths, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes, but you can't do it by looking at this diagram. This is a diagram of energy. What can we see from this diagram? Well, we can see we've got a blue LED, because most blue LEDs start at 450 nanometers, and we've got phosphor. And that blue and yellow, if you mix them together, make white. Don't concern yourself too much about these gaps. We're going to use maths to figure out how well a particular shape spectrum will allow us to see a broad range of colors. What else we can see is that there's no ultraviolet. Ultraviolet in museums is, we start measuring it at 400 nanometers, and a blue pump or a violet pump will have practically no UV. Incandescent and halogen will. You'll also see, and UV is by far the most damaging. It doesn't help you see, and it's extremely damaging to light-sensitive, actually UV-sensitive materials. A lot of the things we see, it brittles, it tears apart. We really do not want it on our cultural artifacts. On the right-hand side, we've got infrared, expressed as heat. And there's almost no heat in LEDs, and this is also fabulous because not only are we saving energy by reducing wattage, but this is going to reduce the load on our energy systems, our mechanical systems to heat and cool the building. My mechanical engineer says that when I throw my 5 watts per square foot of incandescent load at my museum in the old days, it would take him 3 hours to regain temperature, humidity, and the resulting dew point of his mechanical systems. By reducing it with LEDs down to, I've been doing it at 1 watt or less, he has much better control of temperature, humidity, and dew point, and that's better for our artwork and much better for preservation. And as much as money as we spend on lighting, we spend a lot more at creating a stable environment. Oh, that's what we call light in the middle, between roughly 400 and 700 nanometers. Every single light on this bench is using the process that I just mentioned. Most of them blue, 1 or 2 of them with a phosphor, with a violet LED. They're all starting with blue LEDs with phosphor dumped into them. Little tiny bits of phosphor in these little points. I crossed out ultraviolet because you shouldn't be using it. Let's move on to multicolor LEDs. Red, blue, and green mixed to white in the middle. And that's what you see right here. Red, blue, and green mixed to white. And I wanted to do a shout out to Wikipedia where I got this image, specifically user BB3CXV, who provided this image. I'm really grateful to Wikipedia for letting us use these images under the CC license. And it really makes it doable and easier to provide good content for you today. As good as red, blue, and green does at mixing to white light, it is difficult and doesn't necessarily provide all the ranges of white light that you want. So we often add a fourth. White light is great. I recently had a LED strip light. I could pick whatever color white light I wanted, and that worked out really nicely. And I was able to tune to just the right quality of warmth or coolness that I wanted with that type of system. In the earlier days of LED, red, blue, green, amber was super popular because it allowed you to mix more of the warm colors more effectively. What you're more likely to see these days is actually red, blue, green, lime, because lime is more close to the lumen. The peak of human vision is this lime color, and it increases efficacy and color rendering ability because it's a broadband LED. I've got a David Hockney painting where I'm using actually a lighting system, a lighting source that includes red, blue, green, lime, deep blue, amber, and cyan. And that's really, right now, the very best as far as it allows me to mix a whole range of colors and manipulate spectrum with more precision than any other LED source I've ever seen. It's interesting to note that it can be done either with integral, which there are a lot more options, or retrofit. There is a light bulb. This light bulb has a radio inside of it, so I can control the different colors of light, and I can have either this spectrum, which is a high color rendering spectrum, or this is increases saturation, increases colorfulness, and we have a range. And we have just entered into the world of color rendering, so let's talk about both a little bit more about color and color rendering. Chromaticity is another word for color. It's really describing the color of the light. And color rendering. These are two different choices, chromaticity and color rendering, and we make them separately, and we'll talk about them one at a time. First of all, let me talk to you a little bit more about what this means. Welcome to my shop. Sorry, it's a mess. And we've got two color checkers on the wall. When I'm trying to replicate the metrics, I take two lights, I tune them to be the same color and the same intensity, because that's the only way to test and to reduce the qualities to just color rendering. Color rendering is how well I see the broad range of colors on this color checker card. This is not coming out of a printer, but is purchased as a sophisticated color assessment tool. On the outside is chromaticity, which is how does my light look against a white surface, whether I'm using the wall or the white and gray squares on the color checker card. Let's take a deeper look at chromaticity on a diagram. This one was developed in the 1920s and solidified in 1931. And what does it do? It gives us color temperature, the red to blue shift along the locus. A locus is a curve along a space, and the Kelvin scale is from red to blue. The warmer colors, counterintuitively, are lower. So a typical incandescent color would be 2700 Kelvin, halogen at 3000 Kelvin, and daylight starts about 5000, and daylight can be any number of colors, certainly up to 10,000 or beyond. Neutral is probably around 3500. That's been understudied, but some preliminary evidence by researchers like Wendy Davis suggests that 3500 to 4000 is a neutral range. DUV is something you may not have heard of, and it's really important. An isotherm is something that's perpendicular to the locus. It's actually based on another color space, not this one. It's the 1960 or 1964 color space, where this shape of this chart was rearranged to measure correlated color temperature, or DUV. What we're doing here is if it's a negative DUV, that means that it's pink. And if it's a positive DUV, it's green. And this is really important because Kelvin temperature or color temperature only measures red to blue. DUV gives us a sense of how pink to green the light is, and things like LEDs that aren't naturally black body radiators, they don't necessarily sit on this locus like an incandescent light always will, or most of the time will. So an LED or a fluorescent or anything else can more easily be pink to green. And as humans, we are more sensitive to these green to pink shifts. Oh, this is also a really cool feature. If we were to pick 3 points, a red, a green, and a blue, draw a triangle in between, this gives us the theoretical range of colors we can mix. And this works with any of these CI charts, and it's just great. So what is the right color for lighting artwork? I don't know is kind of the answer. Lots of people have very strong opinions. And what I think if you take a a tuner and you tune just the right color of light, what you're largely seeing is color difference. Human beings can white balance to a broad range of white lighting sources. So after 30 seconds, we're mostly chromatically adapted to see things as white. So we really don't see the color of light absolutely. If you have to choose a color of light and want an answer to the question that I've posed here, choose 3000 Kelvin in 2019. That will work pretty well, unless you want a warm environment. And if you want an environment to expressly appear warm, what you do is you mix colors and you give people a little bit of daylight or other cool lighting source, and that will keep the warm lights warm. And we see things as color interaction. For example, in this gallery, this is 3000 Kelvin, but if you look at the daylight, you can see it's a little bit cooler. I chose 3000 Kelvin because it's in 2019, it's a good, even compromise. In the future, it could be 3500 Kelvin, and honestly, that would work perfectly well. The next gallery over is still incandescent, and this type of incandescent is actually a little bit green. So these two colors blended reasonably well, so I didn't have to come up with something that looked a little bit green and odd in this gallery, and they matched reasonably well. Another gallery, if it's 19th century, maybe I want something warmer. By having different colors in different galleries, you're going to see one is warm as one is cool, but once you're near that and you're in that gallery for 30 seconds to 2 minutes when you're fully chromatically adapted, it really doesn't make that much difference. So don't beat yourselves up too much about this. I work in an art museum, and one of our secret weapons for knowing what I just said was true is the great artist and teacher Joseph Albers, who famously wrote Interactions of Color. All of my thanks to Yale Foundation, the Albers Foundation at Yale, who developed an iPad app where they took Albers' classic books and they made it into an iPad app so we don't have to go nuts. If you ever took a design class where you had to cut colored paper into precise squares, you don't have to do that anymore. You can do those experiments super fast with this app. Let me show you one. Oh, but first, it's Albers who said, "He who claims to see colors independent of their illusionary changes fools only himself and no one else." Meaning we see the interaction of color, like I was talking about with galleries being different colors. If it's really important for you to see and experience warmth or coolness, you need an interaction of colors. You need this and that. For example, the this and that of these two squares are the same color and they look different because how they're interacting with the colors directly next to them. And of course, they're the same color. And this is the type of experiment you can do in this great iPad app from the Albers Foundation, found on right now just on iPads, unfortunately. If you don't believe me, here's another example. This is a Barisal wall. This example came to me, and what this has the ability, this gallery has the ability to do is change colors. The wall itself can change colors while the lights that are hitting the artworks will stay the same. Let me show you. Did you see the artwork go yellow? It's not because the artwork went yellow. It's because the back wall changed colors. Let me do that again. So this is the power of the interaction of color. And and then we don't see colors absolutely, but we see colors the interaction. So within everything that I'm trying to talk about today, that I want you to think about light in the most sophisticated way, not to dumb it down to things that light is not. It's difficult to tease out what's really going on here. If you're buying a new batch of LEDs, here's a useful tip. They should all be the same color, and it's useful just to put them on a white wall and make sure that they're all the same color. At this stage, it's also useful to take one of these light bulbs and put it away in the closet. So, because color stability is an issue. But I'm going to first take these light bulbs and drop them down so you can see how that works as a wash. And remember this gallery? This was one of the first galleries that I tested LEDs on, and after 6 months, they started changing color. I took my spectrometer, I measured it, and this is a measurement that says that I've got 6 noticeable differences after about 6 months of usage. And that is a problem. 6 noticeable differences is a lot of difference. This was in 2011. Time has changed. Our LEDs are better, but color stability is still an issue. So taking one of those light bulbs, putting it on the shelf, and then you can come back periodically if you think that things aren't quite right, and you can compare and see if your LEDs are changing color. And I'll be honest, if they change all as a group, it may not matter to you, but if it does, that gives you a control. That takes us to color rendering. And things get a little bit more complicated here. We measure color rendering in 2 ways. Color fidelity, which means does it match a reference source or not? Reference source, for the argument's sake, is an incandescent light at the same color of whatever light you're doing. And saturation. Color fidelity just tells you if there's a difference between this and that. Saturation tells you, is it getting more colorful or less colorful? First, I have to introduce an ugly word called metamerism. If you work in an art gallery and if you're a conservator, you're probably familiar with metamerism, which is the thing that drives you nuts when your in-painting matches or doesn't match depending on the lighting source. That is metamerism. But metamerism really describes how different types of energy can create the same visual response. So each one of these different energy graphs are actually the same color white, very close to the same color white, even though the energy graphs are totally different. Same thing with LEDs. Each one of these LEDs has a very different spectrum as I've measured them, but they all create roughly the same color of 3000K white. Now, how each one of these lighting sources will allow us to see a broad range of colors, that is color rendering, and we need a metric for that. The old metric that we developed in the 1960s, before I was born, is color rendering index. And those scientists picked 8 pastel colors, often found in 1960s era kitchens. And they said, hey, the reference, again, is incandescent at the same color as whatever light you're testing. And is there any noticeable difference between them based on the average of these particular 8 color samples? We've been saying this is terrible for years. Recently, a group of scientists working at the Illuminating Engineering Society came up with a better metric. And this is about to be adopted by the CIE on an international agreement. They chose 99 samples, much better colors, much deeper reds, much better color set that would better assess how we assess color. And also all of these colors are real world samples. They bin them into different groups so we could get our heads around them a little bit more effectively. We can reproduce these metrics in your own laboratory. I take 2 color checker cards. I'm taking a look at 2 very different spectra here. The color is roughly the same, but you can see the reds on this one pop a lot more than the ones on the left. Which one is high color rendering? Here's the spectrum. The spectrum is much smoother here. That often indicates a higher color rendering, where spiker distributions could be doing all kinds of things. If you want to make things look more colorful, a discontinuous spectrum is helpful. Now, for museums, this could be a secret weapon for us, because as we reduce the illuminance to 50 lux for light-sensitive materials, it makes things less colorful. So a discontinuous spectrum might be to our advantage, even though it's likely a lower color rendering source. And I'll get to the metrics in a second. First of all, I just measured the color, and they're roughly the same color. So they are indeed the same color. This is a TM30 graph. This just tells you if it matches this white line on the circle exactly, that means that's very high color rendering. And this is indeed a high color rendering source. The one that's more colorful actually changes the color rendering, that it makes green and red things look more colorful. Here are the metrics associated with it. CRI 92 on the left and 18 on the right. And it has a lower color rendering because it makes things look more colorful. There's a lot of evidence that say people like things that look more colorful, and that people appreciate that. So despite people appreciating it, it still gets a ding on the CRI. That's the other feature of TM30, is it adds a new metric called gamut, and it lets us know the direction of shift. The fidelity on TM30 is analogous to CRI, R of F, and the two lights were the same exact intensity. If you want more information about TM30, I urge you to go to a website housed at Penn State University by Kevin Hauser. This is still up as of today, even though Kevin recently moved to another university, Oregon State. And I just heard recently joined the staff at Pacific Northwest National Labs. And I'm really grateful to Kevin and the entire team at Pacific Northwest National Labs for all their work. Michael Royer, Michael Poplovsky, the whole group over there have been just amazing. And with that, we're at movement, and I need to take a break.